One day, while Trnt was in the princess's chamber, with many other maidens there, he said, "O Trnt, why are you hesitant about dying when you see the father is in alliance with his council against his daughter? Do you think that so much beauty, virtue, and grace, along with the greatness of lineage, will be subject to a Moorish enemy of God and our holy law, and it will be destroyed and fall into decay?" The princess quickly answered, "How could you think that I would subject myself to a Moor, or that I would stoop to being friend of a Moorish dog? They have as many wives as they like, and not one of them is really a wife, because they can leave them whenever they wish. Forget all those thoughts, virtuous knight, and trust your Carmenisa. She will defend all your rights, just as you have defended hers, and while you can command me in everything you wish, as if you were my lord." Another day Trnt was going to the princess's chamber, and he met Blnc. He asked her what the princess was doing, and she answered, "Oh, you saint, why do you want to know what my lady is doing? If you had come earlier, you would have found her in bed, and if you had seen her the way I had seen her, your soul would be in paradise. The more a person sees what he loves, the more he wants it. That's why I think it's more delightful to see something than to imagine it. Come in if you'd like. You'll find her dressed in her skirt. I want to talk to you about my own desire. Why doesn't my Hippopotamus come with you? It's hard to think that I hurt inside when today's pleasure shouldn't be put off for later." "Maiden," said Trnt, "I beg you to tell me in all truth if the Empress or anyone else I should fear is inside." "I wouldn't tell you one thing if it were something else," said Blnc. "I would be bad for us both. You for going in, and me for letting you go. I know that the princess doesn't want your love for her to go unrewarded, and since I know how much you hunger for your heart's desire, I want to help you." Then Trnt went into the chamber and found the princess combing her hair. When she turned and saw him, she said, "Who gave you the right to come in here? You shouldn't come into my room without my permission. If the emperor knew about this, he could charge you with disloyalty. I beg you to leave. My breast is trembling in fear." Trnt paid no attention to the princess's words, but took her in his arms and kissed her again and again on her breasts, her eyes, and her mouth. When the maidens saw Trnt playing with their lady that way, they were silent, but when they saw Trnt putting his hand under her skirt, they came to her aid. While they were frolicking this way, the empress was coming to see her daughter's chamber to see what she was doing, and with their games they did not hear her until she was at the chamber door. Trnt quickly laid on the floor, and they spread clothes over him. Then the princess sat on top of him and began combing her hair. The empress sat down at her side, nearly on Trnt's head. Only God knows how shamefully afraid Trnt was then. He was in anguish while they talked about the celebrations they were planning, until the maiden came with the hours. Then the empress got up and withdrew to the one side of the room to say the hours. The princess was afraid the empress might see him, and did not dare move. When the princess had finished combing her hair, she put her hand under the clothes and combed Trnt's hair, and from time to time he kissed her hand and took the comb away. All the maidens went in front of the empress, and then Trnt got up quietly and left with the comb the princess had given him. When he was outside the room, thinking he was safe and there was no one, and that no one had seen him, he saw the emperor and a chamberlain coming directly to the princess's chamber. When Trnt saw them passing through the great hall, he panicked and quickly went back into the princess's chamber and said to her, "My lady, help me. The emperor is coming." "Oh," said the princess, "we get out of one bad situation and then go into one that's even worse. I told you what would happen, but you're always coming at the worst times." She quickly had the maidens standing in front of the empress again, and they quietly led him to another chamber. There they put mattresses on top of him so that if the emperor came in, as he often did, he would not see him. When the emperor came into the chamber, he found his daughter combing her hair. He stayed there until she had finished and the empress had said her hours, and all the maidens were dressed. When the princess was at the chamber door, she asked where her gloves were. Then she said, "Oh, I put them in a place none of you knows about." She and her maidens went back inside the chamber where Trnt was and took off all the mattresses covering him. Then he jumped up and caught the princess in his arms, dancing around the room with her and kissing her again and again. "Oh, how beautiful you are! I've never seen a maiden as perfect as you. Your Majesty is so superior to all women in knowledge and discretion that I'm not surprised the Moorish Sultan wants to have you in his arms." "Appearances are deceiving," said the princess. "I'm not as perfect as you say I am. That light shining in your eyes is love. Kiss me and let me go. The emperor is waiting for me." Trnt could not answer her because the maidens were holding on to his hands, so he could not muss her hair with his playing around. When he saw her leaving, and that he could not touch her with his hands, he stretched out his leg and put it under her skirt so that his toe touched her where it should not, and he put his leg between her thighs. Then the princess ran out of his chamber to be with the emperor, and Widow Repose took Trnt out through the garden door. When Trnt was in his own lodging, he took off his shoes and stockings. Then he had the stockings and shoe that had touched the princesses embroidered with pearls, diamonds, and rubies, worth more than 25,000 ducats. On the day of the joust, he wore the shoe and stocking. Everyone saw it and was amazed at the fine jewelry, for a shoe like that had never been seen before. And on that foot he wore no armor, but only on the left foot, as a crest for his helmet, he wore 4 golden rods, the Holy Grail, and upon that was the comb the princess had given him, with a motto that read, "There is no virtue but that which exists in her." Every day Trnt was in the court, talking and taking his ease with the emperor, and much more so with the ladies. And he changed clothes every day, but he always wore the same stocking. One day the princess said to him in a mocking tone, "Tell me, Trnt, this custom you have of wearing an embroidered stocking on one foot, but not the other, is it something they do in France or in some other place?" This was the day the festival had ended, and they were on the way to Pera, and the princess had said these words with Stephanie and Widow Repose close by. "What, my lady? Doesn't your Majesty know what this custom means? Doesn't your Excellency remember that day when the Empress came in and I was hidden with your maiden's clothing on top of me, and the Empress nearly sat on my head? Afterwards your father came in, and you hid me in the little chamber under the mattress, and when they had gone, while I was playing with your Highness, since I couldn't reach you with my hands, my foot had to take their place, and I put my leg between your thighs, and my foot touched higher up, where my soul wishes to find its happiness." "Oh, Trnt," said the princess, "I remember very well what you told me that day, and my body still bears the marks. But the day will come when, just as you have one leg embroidered today, you will be able to embroider both of them, and you may place them where you will, at your pleasure." When Trnt heard her saying these words so full of love, he quickly dismounted from his horse, saying that his gloves had fallen, and he kissed her leg above her skirt and said, "The place where grace was granted should be kissed." As soon as they reached the city of Pera, and when they were about to don their armor, they saw 9 galleys approaching land. The emperor would not allow the tournament to begin until they found out where the galleys were from. The galleys put into port in less than an hour, and they turned out to be French. Their captain was a cousin of Trnt. He had been a page to the king, and the king had made him Viscount of Branches. This Viscount had decided to come and help his cousin in the battles against the infidel, and he and other nobles had come, along with 5,000 French archers that the King of France had given to them. And each of the archers had a page and a squire, and when the galleys had docked at Sicily, the king there had given them many horses. The emperor postponed the tournament for the following day. Then 800 knights with gold spurs came out to the grounds, and no one was allowed to participate if he had not been dubbed a knight, and unless he wore silk or brocade or gold trappings. The Duke of Pera was captain of half the men, and Trnt commanded the other half. So that each would know who the other was, they had small flags attached to their helmets, some green and others white. Trnt had 10 knights enter the field of battle, and the Duke 10 others, and they began to fight very well. When the 20 entered, then 30, they began to mix together. Each of them did as well as he possibly could in using his weapons. Trnt kept an eye on his men, and when he saw that they were not doing well, he entered the fray with his lance poised, and he went against another knight so ferociously that he thrust his lance completely through him, and it came out the other side. Then he drew his sword and dealt terrible blows all around so that he seemed like a ravenous lion, and all the onlookers were amazed at his great strength and spirit. The emperor was very satisfied at this singular display of arms. When it had gone on for nearly 3 hours, the emperor came down from the cenotaph, mounted a horse, and quickly rode into the fray to separate the men, because he saw the tempers were rising and that many were wounded. After all the knights had disarmed themselves, they went to the palace. There they talked about the singular displays of arms, and the foreigners said that they had never seen such valiant men. The Sultan's ambassadors, who had seen them, were filled with wonder. The night the emperor returned with his men and all the ladies to the city of Constantinople. The following day, after Mass, they all went to the marketplace, which was as nicely decorated as it had been the first day. When the Sultan's ambassadors arrived and everyone was present, the emperor gave them this reply: "Nothing brings greater anguish than to have His Majesty hear abominable words that offend God and the world. I pray that His immense goodness will not permit me to do things against His holy Catholic faith, like giving my daughter as a wife to a man who is outside our law. For all the treasure that the Grand Carmany and the King of Upper India could pay, they cannot have their liberty unless they restore all my empire to me." When they had heard these words, the ambassadors stood up and took their leave and went back to the Sultan. After the celebrations was over and the ambassadors had gone, the emperor held war councils many times. Trnt fostered his romance and was very insistent about staying near the princess because he saw that the end of the truce was approaching. The emperor indicated that he wanted the captain to be in camp to take charge of the men, and the captain showed that he was attending to men going with him so that they would be ready, since he was very eager to confront the Turks. Trnt pleaded insistently with the princess to give him the satisfaction he wanted. The princess saw how great Trnt's passion was, and she said, "Trnt, I know full well what you want, but my reputation is spotless. Tell me, what gave you the hope of being in my bed? Just to imagine it is a great infamy. If I gave in to you, I couldn't hope that it would not be known. What could I use to excuse my transgressions? I beg you, Trnt, my lord, do not rob me lightly of my tender virginity." And she would say no more. Trnt was rather stunned by the princess's words, which showed how little she loved him, for he thought he had progressed in his love affair, and now he found it was entirely the opposite. While they were talking, the emperor came into the chamber and took his daughter Carmenisa by the hand. They went upstairs together to the treasure tower to take out money and give it to Trnt so that he could go to the camp. When they had gone, Trnt was left with the maidens. He thought about what the princess had said to him, and he realized that the widow Repose had overheard his secret and everything he had said to her. Trnt decided to see if he could win the widow over with promises, and with warm and tender words he said, I believe I have been offended by my lady. I want to do great services for the princess so that she will see that I am worthy of her love. Although Stephanie already has many possessions and great wealth, I would like to give her even more. I would give widow Repose a duke or a count or a marquise for a husband, and as many possessions as would make her happy, and I would like to do the same for Playmavidia and all the other ladies. Stephanie thanked Trnt for herself and all the other women. Widow Repose said to Stephanie, You thank him for yourself. I know how to thank him on my own. And smiling, she turned to Trnt and said, Thank you very much for your thoughtfulness, but I want no other husband, no matter how great a lord he is, except the one I adore day and night. He has not killed me yet, but he has given me reason to die. I won't say any more about that, because this isn't the time or place. When Widow Repose finished, Playmavidia said, My lord and captain, don't you know that repentance follows sin? You've come to my lady's rooms and found them like a tomb. Since you can find no mercy in them, please don't lose hope. I beg you, Rome wasn't built in a day. Are you discouraged because of some trifle my lady said to you? When you're in a hard-fought battle, you're like a lion, but you always come out victorious. And yet are you afraid of a lone woman who, with our help, you'll conquer? Do you remember that pleasant night in the castle of Malvea when I was dreaming? You saw how mercifully you dealt with that situation. I'm only trying to tell you that will always help you in this affair. And I know what the solution is. You have to mix in a little force, because your fear, which comes from ignorance, stops you from using it. It's a terrible thing for maidens to have to say these awful words. I like it. I'll work as hard as I can for you in this affair, I promise you. And I think it that just a reward, very inferior to my work. And I deserve to have your grace help with the love of my Hippolytus. But I'm more than a little afraid, because I can see where his wayward steps are taking him. And I don't like the way he's going at all. I'm afraid of the danger he'll place himself in, because he is a very good swordsman, and he strikes not at the legs but at the head, and he knows much more than I have shown him. Trnt brightened up a little at Playmerdevia's jokes, and he stood up to tell her, "Maiden, it looks to me as though, instead of hiding your advances towards Hippolytus, you don't care who knows about them." "What do I care if everyone knows?" said Playmerdeviya. "If you men think that just because we're maidens we don't dare say anything, it's your nature to be good at first, then bad afterwards. You're like the ocean. When someone starts to go in the water it seems soft, and then later, when he's all the way in, it's a torrent. That's the way love begins. At first you're soft, and later on you're harsh and terrible." While they were talking, the emperor came in. He took Trnt by the hand and led him out of the room, and they talked at great length about the war. When it was time to eat, Trnt and his men went to their quarters. That night, when the princess wanted to go to bed, Widow Repose said to her, "My lady, if your majesty knew about the things Trnt said to us ladies, you would be amazed. He took me aside and told me things about your excellency that I'm loath to repeat, because his words showed how little he cares for you." Widow Repose's words had a great effect on the princess. Without letting her say another word, she put her cloak back on, and they went into the tiny chamber where no one could overhear them. First the widow told her what Trnt had said to all the ladies, and how he wanted to arrange honorable marriages for them all. Then, with great wickedness and deceit, the evil widow gave vent to her malice. "Trnt is a cruel man. He doesn't have the good sense of the others, but he is more shameless and daring. If your highness knew what he says about you, you would never be able to love him." "Tell me at once," said the princess, "and don't make me suffer so." "He spoke to me secretly," said the Widow Repose, "and he made me swear on the gospel that I wouldn't say a word to anyone. But since you are my mistress, and I would be very going against the loyalty I owe you, any oath I've made is worthless. First he told me that Stephanie and Playmerdeviya are in alliance with him, so that, with your consent or by force, he will possess your majesty. And if you don't do it of your own free will, he'll plunge his sword through your neck and kill you cruelly, and then he will do the same thing to your father. He will steal all your treasure, and they'll get on their ships and go back to their land. And with the treasure they carry off, the clothing and jewels, they'll find maidens there who are much more beautiful than your highness, for he says that you don't look any better than a serving girl, and that you are completely shameless. That you'll give it to anyone who wants it. Watch out for your virtue, my lady. You can see what that mad traitor thinks of your highness. And that faithless man says even more, that he didn't come to this land to fight, and that he has been hurt too many times because of his misfortune of knowing you and your father. Do you think, my lady, that is a way of talking is proper for knights? Look at what he thinks of the honor of your excellency and the emperor, who have granted him so many benefits and honors. Anyone who says things like that should burn in flames. Do you know what the other things he says? That he doesn't love any woman alive, unless it's for her wealth. He says many other wicked things too. I remember he told me that if he ever had another night like the one in Malvais, even if he made you 1,000 promises, he wouldn't keep any of them. With your consent or by force, he would take you, and he would say to you, 'You evil woman, I don't thank you, now that I've had my pleasure.' Oh, my lady, my heart cries blood when I think of all the terrible things he said about you, your highness. That's why, my lady, I want to give you some advice, even though you haven't asked me for it. There's no one who has more compassion for you than I have. I cradled you in my arms and fed you from my own breast, and your highness has hidden from me to entertain that wicked Trnt. You've had more faith in Stephanie and Player de Mavida than in me, and they have betrayed you and sold you. Oh, poor you! How they've defamed you, and they'll do it even more from now on. Keep away from friendships like these, since you know the truth, because what I tell you is the gospel itself. You must swear that you'll never tell a soul about these things I've told your majesty. I'm afraid that if that traitor Trnt hears about it, he'll have me killed, and then he'll leave. So, my lady, make pretenses and break off your friendship with him little by little, because if your majesty suddenly stopped seeing him, he would think that I told you, and those two ladies deserve to be whipped. Don't you see how big Stephanie's belly is? I'm astonished that the emperor hasn't noticed it, and the same will happen to Player de Movida. The princess was very upset. With tears flowing from her eyes, she began to lament angrily. "Oh God, where is your justice? How is it that fire does not descend from heaven to turn that cruel, ungrateful Trnt into ashes? He was the first knight that I considered my master. I thought he would bring an end to all my troubles, and now I see everything turned around. Oh, who would ever have thought that words like these could come from the mouth of such a virtuous knight? What have I done to him to make him want the deaths of my father and my mother and their miserable daughter? Oh, Trnt, what happened to the love we shared? What crime did I commit for you to think me vile and abominable? Did you really say that you love no lady or maiden unless it's for her wealth, and that you want to take my virginity by force? Oh, if I wanted to be cruel before the sun came up, your chamber would be full of blood, yours, and the blood of all your men." And she said no more. But hearing the call from Matins, she said, "Widow, let's go to bed, even though I'll get little sleep tonight with the great hate I have for Trnt, the one I used to love so much." The widow answered, "My lady, I beg you, please, don't say a word about this to anyone. Who knows what might happen?" "Don't worry," said the princess. "I'll protect you." When they were in their chamber, Stephanie saw them come in and said, "It looks to me, my lady, as though you've had a great deal of pleasure listening to the widow. You've been with her so long. I'd like to know what you were thinking about." The princess climbed into bed without answering, and began to cry bitterly. When the widow had gone, Stephanie asked her why she was crying. The princess told her. "Stephanie, let me be, and take care that this doesn't happen to you." Stephanie was surprised at this, not knowing what it could mean. She did not reply, but drew close to her as she usually did. All that night the princess could not sleep a wink, and cried and lamented continually. In the morning she got up, ill because of her lack of sleep. Nonetheless, she forced herself to go to Mass. When Trnt learned of her condition, and when Stephanie told him about her tears and crying all night long, he was very surprised, and wondered what he had done. Going up to the princess, he said, "If your excellency would like to tell me what is wrong, I would be very pleased." Trnt could say no more because of the great emotion that he felt, and the princess softly began to say the following words. "I will spend the rest of my life hiding the cause of my grief, and don't think that it doesn't cost me a great deal of effort to keep such terrible pain hidden." She could say no more, because the doctors came, along with the empress. Trnt took his leave to go to his lodgings, immersed in thought about what the princess had told him, and he felt distressed. He could not eat, and did not want to leave his chamber until the constable went to the palace, and spoke at length with Stephanie and Player de Movida. He told them what great anguish Trnt was in because of what the princess had said to him.